Swine it.
It's time for a new era of communication in the swine industry. One that you can get the latest updates while commuting or driving to farms. Here you will have the brightest minds of the global swine industry in your pocket.
How to help ordinary people do extraordinary things on these farms. Meaningful work is one of the best therapeutic solutions for folks.
Swine It podcast is only possible with the support of forward-looking and innovative sponsors like Elanco's Prevacent, a new PRRS Spective. Visit Prevacent, PRRS.US to learn more. NutriQuest, experts serving producers and delivering breakthrough solutions. Genesis, the first power in genetics. Zinpro, essential trace minerals, exceptional performance. Every Pig, a simple yet powerful pig health and production management tool. Gestal, always one step ahead in swine feeding.
Welcome to Swine It Podcast. My name is Marcio Gonçalves, your host for today's episode.
This episode's sponsor highlight is about Every Pig. The truth is, precision swine production is not the future, it is the present. Every Pig is the intelligent pig health platform. It is a simple yet powerful pig health and production management tool. Request a free 20-minute demonstration at www.everypig.co/swineit.
Hello everyone. Today we have Jonathon Hoek talking about human capital in pig farms and then going over issues and solutions. How are you today, Jonathon?
I'm doing well, Marcio. Appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today.
It's my pleasure, and let's get right into this very interesting topic and very challenging topic as well. But I guess before that, Jonathon, if you can just share with me and with the audience about yourself, how did you get involved with pigs, and walk us through your career so far.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I grew up in the south suburbs of Chicago. I was a city kid, and sidewalks, neighbors were 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet from wall to wall, and fell in love with farming through my grandfather. I would go visit him in the summers, and my mom and dad allowed me to spend a couple summers during my high school years at a pig farm in northwest Iowa. And many people fall in love with pigs in Iowa, and that's what I did. And I came back to the Chicagoland area. I got an ag production degree in '86, and then ended up in DeMott, Indiana, where I met the Belstra family. And Bud Belstra had took me under his wing, and I always say everybody has a champion that believes in them, and much of how I feel about people management and business comes from Bud and his approach. And so I'm so grateful for the opportunity to know him and to have him. He always believed in people, and that was a great start for me.
Very nice. And you spent quite some time there, right?
Yeah, I was with in ownership of pig production for about 10 years, and then I spent 20 years in the Belstra system, and had left there in 2017 as vice president of pig production. Tremendous organization, great production, and learned a lot. And it was some of this passion for people and for biomedical pigs that I ended up making the change in 2017. So,
okay. And then more recently, you opened your own company, as I understand.
Yeah, we started a company called Summit Precision Production to address some of the the precision technology that's coming to the marketplace, and did a couple focus groups, and some of the two biggest problems that producers relayed to us were human capital and decision-ready information. We've got a lot of technology that is bringing data, and often we get kind of locked up on how do we look at that data, how do we analyze the data, and so we set out to look at those two aspects and see what comes along the way. So, but our thought was that people are the gateway to innovation and the gateway to innovation uptake, and so that we thought that was a good place to start.
Very nice. Well, so right into that topic of human capital and its availability and retention has been a big issue, right, for our industry for the last several years, and I would assume in other areas of agriculture as well.
Yes.
What are your general thoughts on the issue, John?
Yeah, as we took a look at that, Marcio, the interesting thing is we kind of studied the evolution of people in particularly swine production, but agriculture in general. It seems like in the swine business, every 10 to 15 years, you had some significant shifts in production style and production types and production strategies. And, if you go back to the 50s and 60s, a lot of pigs outside, and then the late 60s started putting pigs inside on slats. Then in the 70s and 80s, confinement buildings got more readily available and are readily used. Then the 90s with the large scale that hit agriculture through the 90s and the 2000s. And there's a shift in, what we found is a shift in what type of worker the industry needs about every 10 to 15 years. And small farms became large scale, highly geographical areas throughout this evolution. And so we think about what's next. What's next? What does the worker of tomorrow look like? And so that is going to be a very different worker than what happened in the 60s. And so how do we adjust to that, and how do we also create an irresistible place to work within these systems? And food production is one of the most noble tasks, and I'm often told by people that work in agriculture that farmers are some of the nicest people ever. And yet we have some of the highest retention and turnover rates. And so how do we deal with that is a big thing on our mind. And it crosses cultural and socioeconomic situations with people, and depending on what part of the country you're in. And so how do we drive and reduce turnover and retention in many ways that people outside agriculture are approaching it? And that's kind of our thought to focus on.
Very good. Yeah, that makes total sense. And in your experience, in your research, what do you see as possible solutions there?
Yeah, I think as we looked at studying both outside of agriculture and within agriculture, we've kind of had a core value to look at 30% of our intellectual infusion into our company outside of agriculture, because people are people, and many companies have issues with people, and there are a lot of solutions that are working in heavy industry or in retail that have an application for agriculture. And so in our research, job satisfaction, task performance, manager, positive manager feedback were all contributors to in our regression studies to increasing pigs weaned per mated female on these systems that we did our research in. And so many of those areas are tied to culture. What type of culture is in the barn, and what type of culture does the leadership foster? And I always use the analogy, Patrick Lencioni has a book, The Three Signs of a Miserable Job. And it's immeasurement, irrelevance, and mission. And so there are things I think we can do to build culture, and what we think is important is how do we measure that objectively and empirically, and then develop systems to drive that change, much like we do with production issues, much like we do in other areas of our business. How do we take this human asset and build tools that really support the development of a culture, a positive culture, within these farms. Peter Drucker had a quote: "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And so you've got to address the culture before you can really drive the strategy. And so that's and we believe Possible Solutions, Marcio, are using what's been used in the industry for many, many years, and that's general mental ability testing, the application of assessments via industrial psychology. Those are some tools that haven't been all that prevalent in agriculture, and I think agriculture has reached a size and a scale now where some of these tools may be effective as we understand team dynamics. There was a study in 1998 by Smith and Hunter that put some empirical data together that showed that the predictability and utility of using assessments actually is as effective as a personal interview. And so there was some really fascinating research outside of agriculture that we think will apply. And so we're building tools and assembling tools to bring that to protein production.
Interesting. Joe, is there optimal number of or range of sows per employee?
Well, it's interesting. Swine Management Systems, Valerie Duttlinger presented some of that data at the Layman Conference, and they had, I believe it was 60 farms with the sow per person ratio, and there was no correlation to performance. And which we thought was really fascinating. And so there's all kinds of context that you got to bring into that. It depends on if facilities are spread out, if they're all under one roof, and but the range was from 388 sows per person to 100 sows per person, and in the regressions there was no correlation to the sow to person ratio. And so, we believe that culture and company culture drives so much of that performance, and some of the traditional things like experience and age and have very little correlation on performance. And so those are fascinating statistics that have got us have started us to think different about how we approach human capital.
Very interesting. So as we think about that, how do you think technology can help?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we are exploring coalescing or bringing together and using technology to create workflow. And I'll give you an example. I think that many swine units, and people go to work in the morning and they have no idea when they're going to go home.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody doesn't show up, or if a feed line breaks or a water line breaks, and if something catastrophic happens, and but a catastrophic thing usually doesn't happen. It's usually one of these small little tweaks where there's a shift in workflow and you go into emergency mode. And so what we really think needs to happen is an effort in engineering workflow and creating tools, digital tools, that allow visibility across the entire farm as to what jobs are accomplished and how quickly they're accomplished, and sort of creating a scoreboard, Marcio, where people can say, I would love someday where people can go home and say, look, I accomplished, I hit 90% of my goal, I hit 110% of my goal, and they can have immediate feedback on how they're doing. And there's a saying, if you're not keeping score, it's just practice. And so how do we use technology to bring that feedback to employees, because everybody likes to know where they're at. And so that's one way I think there is technology that can help. I think also just driving efficiency. Many of these farms are getting to be 10 to 15 acres under one roof. The visibility of where people are at, what work they're doing at in real time, and being able to just communicate across that 15-acre farm are all possible ways where technology could come in, data entry, even getting into some AI and machine learning on workflow schedules and prioritization of tasks. Those are some possibilities that will come with technology.
Interesting, yeah, and one thing with these big farms is the time that it takes to go from one place to the other, right?
Yep.
And I was just thinking here out loud if there's any system that have tried to implement any sort of way to move faster. It's something that I was just thinking out loud.
Yeah, well, we always use the analogy where if a guy forgets a tool or he needs to go back to the office, and some of these farms are half mile from corner to corner, maybe more. And,
right.
Oftentimes you bump into Joe in the farrowing house and, hey, how's it going? By the time he stops and talks to everybody, you've got time, a lot of time burned up. And I was, we were exploring, I was in an egg farm a while back, and one of the metrics that egg farms use is the dozens per man hour. And I mentioned to them, how do you have meetings, or how do you have employee meetings and whatnot? And so we keep them to 15 minutes because when you have, or 10 minutes, or we don't have them very often because it impacts eggs per man hour. And I thought, wow, that was interesting. And so I think in swine production, there's some opportunity there to really take a look at the breakdown of labor percentages or hours in the various departments. And I don't know that we know what's good and what's bad at this point. And we've got a pilot project now where we're breaking down man hours by department and looking at possibly in the future where you could go into a farm and understand what the benchmark should be, and then how to design training tools and time management tools to reach those benchmarks. And so sort of a human performance monitor. We spend a lot of time looking at production performance monitors, and I think we have a vision for a human performance monitor as it impacts and how it impacts production.
Very nice. Is there an indicator as of today that you think is the closest to be helpful in this regard?
We in my past we measured minutes per pig as a benchmark at times. I think certainly the dollars per pig is a big indicator. We believe that there is definitely some innovation that has to come to people, space, and logistics within these larger units. The other big thing we believe is just the architecture of workflow. How can we go in and develop benchmarks or parameters for workflow? All pig farms have pretty basically the same types of jobs that happen, and can we blueprint that out in a way that we can measure it and understand how to drive time out and or reallocate time for more impactful work. And the whole premise of precision agriculture is to deploy resources to the problem, not to the areas of the farm that are doing fine. And so that's another place, Marcio, where technology can come in. If we can have a monitoring of pig health, pig stress, whatever you want to call it, where we deploy the people to the problem and not necessarily to every pig on the farm every day or every hour or whatever. And I think there can be some real gains to helping solve some of this labor issue. And it would help us be more competitive with our wages too. And I think that's a big thing as we start to hire more educated folks, maybe some folks with a little more sophisticated strategic minds. Some of our wages are going to have to meet the demand, and so
Right.
so if there's ways to increase efficiency, to increase opportunity, that's I think that'll be a big thing for our industry.
Very interesting. I was actually thinking today with cell phones, and of course you start getting into the biosecurity issues of having cell phones in a farm versus not having. And I think a few years ago, there was no cell phones in farms. Now I see a little more because people don't, cannot get away from their phones. But I started thinking about just the location tracking, and I wonder I don't know if your technology or any other would track the labor inside the farm, so you could try to optimize that.
Yes, yeah, and that's part of what we are working on a product to completely lay out workflow through it'll be an app-based product, and it will allow managers to assign tasks and monitor the quality of the task as well as the time it takes. And we want to get to a timestamp situation at some point in time. I've talked with systems, and they do time studies where they may vaccinate one room, it takes 45 minutes. They vaccinate the next room, it takes an hour and a half. Same pigs, same amount of vaccine. And you think about that 120 million pigs across the United States, and there's millions of dollars, there by not understanding how to consistently predict that workflow. And so those are ways that, and there are some technologies coming out with some companies for tracking, and we're exploring how we incorporate that into the program, and so those are all pieces that will help bring some efficiency and labor efficiency to our systems.
Very good. Anything else on the topic, John, before we move to the 3 questions we ask every guest?
Well, I would just say that I think all people want to do a good job. They want to be a part of something successful, and we're excited to dig into the from an industrial psychology standpoint on how to help ordinary people do extraordinary things on these farms. And I guess those of us that have a passion for pigs understand that to a degree. And I think there's a lot of people, meaningful work is one of the best therapeutic solutions for folks, and it just our industry so desperately needs good people, and I think we want to try to understand how to fix this problem. We talk about it at all the meetings. We talk about some of the potential solutions, but it just seems to be such a drain on our companies, and we just look forward to partnering with the industry and trying to figure this out.
Very nice. That's so true, and I'm glad there's someone focusing on that area, because the industry definitely needs help.
Celebrating its 25th anniversary, Gestal manufactures the original wireless standalone swine feeding system, designed by pork producers for pork producers. They are simple, reliable, and provide peace of mind 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Gestal is not just manufactured by an equipment company, but by a family pork production business with a slat-level understanding. Gestal, always one step ahead in swine feeding.
It is time to our famous 3. So let's jump into our 3 questions we ask every guest every episode. And the first one is, what's your favorite swine-related book?
That's a tough one, Marcio. But I early on in my career, I had I don't know if I'm allowed to list 2 books, but
You are.
David Hollier gave me a book called Aspects, I believe, of Swine Ecology, and coming from south suburbs of Chicago, I dove into a lot of, and there's not a lot of books on swine production, but I appreciated that book. It was a great book on pig production. And a good friend of mine is Keith Thornton, and Keith wrote a book on outdoor pig production. And I'm old enough to have pigs outdoors, and I always, I don't know whether I just love the pictures, but I loved Keith's approach to production and the whole outdoor concept, but not necessarily for the outdoor, but for the pigmanship part. And those 2 men were tremendous pigmen, and that's one of the things that I think needs to be emphasized in our training programs and in our approach to people is, how do we train for pigmanship? And those guys were the consummate pigmanship guys, and that's what I appreciated about those books.
Interesting. Yeah, I was not aware of those books. I'll have to check it out. So, what is your favorite book unrelated to pigs?
Well, unrelated to pigs, and I'm going to say it this way, aside from the Bible, Matt Pearman has a book called What's Best Next. And Matt wrote that book on time. It's a book on time management and purpose. And what really struck me about that when I read it, because it talked about it's like setting up a company, right? You have your core values, you have your mission statement, and then you live out of that. And Matt outlined that as the foundation for how you manage your time. And so you have to understand what your mission is. You have to understand what your core values are, and we all have them. I just don't know that sometimes we, at least myself, you sit down and think about, well, what do I want to stand for? Who do I want to be, and how do I want to treat people, and how do I want to love people, and what is my personal brand? And then you design your time management systems around that. And so that was a great book. But I love anything from Patrick Lencioni, and also I read a lot of Harvard Business Review, both best reads and some of their Clayton Christensen books and things like that. I love looking outside of agriculture and trying to find ways to apply successful business practices within agriculture.
Very interesting. Yeah, I love that area too of time management and personal productivity, and definitely have to check that one out as well.
Yep, that's a great book.
Very good. So, John, in your opinion, what separates successful swine professionals from those that are not?
A couple things as I thought about that. I believe you have to have a broader passion for what the pig brings in the service of humans. And we're dabbling a little bit in the biomedical world here, where we're raising I've got a farm that I helped start here this last year that is raising pigs solely for human research. And eventually some of these pigs will probably end up in xenotransplant situations where they're growing human organs for transplants. And it struck me again, and when I was at Bellstrom Milling, we had been very involved in the pig adventure and telling the story of agriculture and things like that. And then it struck me, even beyond food, beyond all the many wonderful things that pigs provide, they provide, eventually, we think they're going to provide organs for human beings. And so the pig is like the gift that keeps on giving. So the love of that pig is one. And I think the ability to create cultures of innovation and high job satisfaction scores, to create companies where people love to go to work, is going to be a real key thing for the future. And particularly with the digital revolution that's coming, I think agriculture, or at least protein production and swine production, is at the tip of the iceberg, I think, on a digital revolution. And preparing for that is going to be necessary to be successful. And so those are some of the things, aside from the obvious, that I would say would separate successful swine professionals. You got to have a love for the pig. We think you got to have a love for the people, and you got to build cultures of innovation and of irresistible places to work, and then you'll be sought out as an employer. So
very cool. Yeah, that's very interesting, very challenging, right, to create that environment. But I think that's absolutely what we need to do. And I wonder even if if we can learn with some of those companies in Silicon Valley and others, if I'm sure they have big challenge as well, attracting the best talents as well there.
Sure, yeah, and I always use the analogy that we are in biological manufacturing, and so how do we look to some of the industrial manufacturing? Peter Deming and those guys are Deming and Drucker spoke a lot about that, but it is a challenge, but our facilities have become much different than what they have in the past, and it's up to us now to make it happen.
Very good. Well, thanks a lot, Joe. Appreciate your time, and we'll be in touch.
You bet. Thank you, Marcio. Appreciate the opportunity.
Hey, guys and girls. I cannot believe it. We crossed 9,000 plays in our podcast, so thank you so much for being part of our community, as well as thanks for all the great guests that we have had. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I do. To be part of our email list and get some exclusive materials, go to our website, www.swineit.com. That's swineit.com, and subscribe to our email list. Also, we love feedback. So if you use the Apple Podcasts app, please leave us a review. It is much appreciated. We'll talk soon.